You'll never have enough resources to sell your product to absolutely everyone. So, a better approach is to segment your audience, which means divide it into groups so you can focus your energy on a subset of everyone in your market. So, if you're going to try to market a product, it's very difficult to give it to everyone, to get everyone to pay attention to it. So you have to pick a subset. Well, what are the subsets that you might use? The first one we call a market. If you think of everyone in the world, what would be a market? A market could be women 25 to 54 years old. This is a group that many producers want to go after. Many products are aimed at this market. Why? Because a lot of women like to shop. If you go into a grocery store, you're going to see a lot of things are designed for women that maybe have families. They have shopping for the household. All of this, it's widely agreed upon and known that women like to shop and shop in these types of stores. So a lot of consumer companies will focus on this particular group. Now, if women 25 to 54 years old, that's still a very, very big group of people. Maybe we need to go a level down. That would be what we call a segment. Let's say it's women 25 to 54 years old who like to mow their lawns. They like to cut their grass. Now, I have some fun with this because my daughters, I have 3 daughters, and none of them like to cut grass. In fact, it's pretty rare, I think, to find women that want to cut their grass. It's not impossible, but in general, that's a more specific group. Now, if we go down even further from that segment, we could call it a niche. So a niche is a subset of the segment. And let's say it's women who like to cut their grass who prefer John Deere. John Deere is a type of tractor company. They also make mowers and riding mowers. And so maybe there's a group of people that want to use that. And then finally, if we go a level below that, we're going to get to an individual. And let's use this example, Jane. Here's a picture of Jane who likes to cut her grass. This is in Corolla Island on the Outer Banks. And you see she is riding a John Deere mower, trimming up the grass all around the local community there. So obviously too specific. We need a big enough group that we can reach through some marketing messages, information, but it's not so small that if we reached everybody and they bought something, we would not be successful. So it can't be everybody. In many respects, it can't be the entire market. We're looking for a segment or a niche. That's where most companies operate most of their products. So why does segmentation matter for most organizations? There's a number of reasons. Number one, it helps organizations understand their customers. Instead of trying to be all things to all people, they can figure out what are the common traits between a group of people that have at least a few things in common. Secondly, it allows them to identify attributes that they want their product to be associated with. Is it the best? Is it the first? Is it solve some sort of problem? These are all things that help define who that particular segment is. Number three, it uses the information to show how different people within that audience that you're going after might use the product. For example, Pittsburgh Corning made a product called glass block and foam glass. Foam glass is a type of insulation. Goes into buildings and protects the environment of the building and so forth. They also discovered that they could make brick cleaners to clean different grills. And so they would make these little bricks and you could scrape off your grill and clean it. So that's an example of how the same product looked for a couple different segments to be used. The fourth way it helps is that it reveals any media differences between the segments. Do they consume media differently? Are they on their phone all of the time? What apps do they use? Do they go anywhere on a regular basis? Do they congregate? How do we reach them? Are there particular lifestyle people that they like, particular influencers that they like? These are all ways that if we find differences in them, we might be able to market our product through those different channels. And then finally, what this segmentation does for us is it allows the marketing team, the product team, to figure out ways to increase engagement, satisfaction, buy again, expand the product. It does all of these things because now we're thinking of that person in that situation and understanding it more. This is a way in which we think about the segment. So instead of thinking about everybody all the time and how they might use the product, we get into a smaller group and think about what they have in common and how they might use the product. And then if there's a second or third group, we do that as well. So that's why segmentation matters so much to organizations. So what are some of the common ways that you can group customers into categories that make sense? Well, one of them you could do is demographics. That's pretty obvious. What's their geography? What's their gender, their education, their income? What's great about that is there's a number of sources like census data and other things that are out there that if you're grouping them that way, you can find those customers. What's not so great, I want to group them by people that drink 2 bottles of wine or more a week. Well, there's not really a list on that unless somebody's run a survey and asked that question and you could buy that. But there's not a definitive list that's out there. So sometimes that's a little bit tougher to look at that way. But demographics definitely key. Another big area is something called firmographic. And so those are based on company attributes such as the industry, where it's located, the number of employees, or revenue. Are you a startup, a mid-size, a major corporation? Are you a quickly growing organization? Or are you a Fortune 500 or a top 50 company? These are all different ways you could organize by size of the firm. Then you've got psychographic. These are very nice ways to classify and segment your customers because it's based on their attitudes, their aspirations, their values, things like this. So you could look at lifestyle. Maybe it's people that like to wear a particular brand or very fancy clothing or something like that, or their personality. Are there people that have different things that they like to do, fun? Maybe they're outdoorsy. They like to hike and camp. Well, that would be psychographic. Or specific traits or opinions. Well, let's talk about people that watch MSNBC. Maybe they're going to be left-leaning, and so that's a way that we organize to that particular group. Another category would be behavioral. This is where we have how they use the product, whether or not they're early adopters, whether or not they're kind of late to technology, they're the last one on. And so we could look at maybe things like how often they use something, the rate in which they use it, the benefits, types, occasions, whether or not they purchase, the decisions, all of these things around behavioral. Let's say you're looking for a car, shopping for a car. Do you like to go to 5 or 10 different dealerships and drive them around? Or do you like to get the online listings out and buy from a private seller? Those are maybe different purchasing habits or styles or types of ways that you could group people. Another classification is by geographic. So are customers different based on where they live? And the answer is probably a little bit. Maybe it's changing, but at least a little bit. So different, the countries they live in, the regions, the cities, the postal codes. These are all things. If people live in a very affluent suburban neighborhood, they might think and act a little differently than if someone's from an inner city regentified area or even an inner city area that's poor and more run down. Then, of course, there's occasional, and this is a great way to organize your customers. It's based on situations, not on the demographics. So it might be like Mondays. Let's organize it around how people feel on Mondays and what they think about. Or seasons. Is it Halloween? How do we market to people that are all about Halloween, or if we have those products, or even vacations, or even based on birthdays, for example. How do you, so that's going to be a different day, of course, of the year for everybody, but we organize based on what people are thinking about that. So that could be one way. And then finally, another way you could organize is based on cultural, their living habits or attributes. So these could be things like regional activities. I spent some time growing up in Oklahoma and Kansas, and we would go to rodeos. What's a rodeo? They'd have horse roping and bull riding and all kind of crazy stuff. If you've never been to a rodeo, it might seem kind of crazy and kind of different, but can be a fun way to think about stuff. You might organize by religion. Somebody that is Orthodox Jew versus a Catholic versus a Baptist. They might all have different ways of thinking or acting. Or even people that are in retirement versus working. What's the retirement mindset, and how are they thinking about things? And so marketing toward that particular group versus another. So you can see those are all based on cultural. So whether it's demographic or firmographic, psychographic, behavioral, geographic, occasional, cultural, those are some bigger buckets that might help you think about how do we start to group our customers so we can make sense out of them, and we can find enough of them to do something with, to have a product, have a viable business or a product line that's successful. So it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed with all of these differences in your target market or the niche you're trying to create, especially if it's just something you think about and you go on, you interrupt it, you got 50 other things going on. So a great technique that a lot of firms use, especially marketing firms, is to create something I call a war room. And this is where you take all of the information you know about your particular audience and you post it up on the walls, and you basically create a situation where you'll be immersed in there. It could be research, so you would have pie charts and bar graphs and things like that. It could be pictures or images. Let's say that it's a family that you're going after, or how old are their kids, and what are their races or nationalities, or if it's some of the occasional things, what are we doing on to celebrate the different holidays or whatever it is that they're doing. They'll actually find pictures of those, paste them up on the wall, so that when you're meeting in this room and talking about it, those images and ideas start to come through and to reach you, so you really get focused on who that particular group of people is that you're going after. Beyond the war room, another technique is to create a persona of that particular person. So what is that? It's basically a made-up person or one person in society that more or less represents the group you're going after. And so the whole idea is, if we can simplify who it is we're trying to reach, then all the decisions about that person become much easier. When you know someone really well, you know what they like, you know when their birthday is, you know what they don't like, you know what they do on certain days, they don't do. All of that stuff pulls together and allows us to really start to get specific and meet that particular person's needs. So it could be their age, the demographics, it could be any of these things, their lifestyle, their habits, the way they look, the type of clothes they wear, all of that. We're going to create a persona. Many marketing campaigns will generally have 3 or 4 different personas they're trying to reach with their target market, and each of those are slightly different and different enough that they can think through it. So once again, instead of trying to market to everybody and having a big blob and a big mess, we get it down to 3 or 4 specific types of people that we're thinking very hard about. So let's say you like this idea of creating persona. How do you go about it? Well, I'd say the first thing is try to pick a real person. Is there somebody you know or met, or is there a famous person? Start with something like that. Then you're going to go through a whole bunch of research. And all of the facts you can, try to marshal those together. Then we're going to look at, are there things that are really unique or stand out about this person, or key decision criteria that they like to make. We want to get all of that in our area and thinking about before we make a final decision. Here's a couple examples of personas or classifications. This one is for the Scouts. The Scouts are an organization that takes young children, either boys or girls, and they do merit badges and adventures, and it's a great way for the parents of these children to interact with them, often with another adult and other groups of children. And if you've ever done Scouts or something like it, it's a very positive thing for many children. So here's a persona of a Scout leader, and notice that it has 4 quadrants. First we have, who am I? And it lists some of the demographics, a 25-year-old, and we figured out a picture that more or less matches this. We've come up with a name for it, and talks about some of the things that this particular Scout leader likes to do. To the right of that, we have a section on their motivations, who they are, what they get motivated by, why they do all of that. We could also have a section on their goals. What are they trying to accomplish? What do they need in terms of products or services or ideas? And then finally, there was a section in this model on frustrations. What gets them fired up? So if we look at all of these, we can think of, well, what products would service this particular person? If we have a product, how do we talk about it? How do we position it? How do we make it work for this particular person? Realizing that a lot of the people that we have to persuade are going to be very different than we are. They're going to have different experiences, different habits, different lifestyles, but we still need to sell them. So the best way to do that is to create an image based on research and based on good thinking that allows us to basically figure out one person or one group of people that we're trying to sell to. So this is why segmentation is so important. It's impossible to be all things to all people all of the time. Nobody's able to do it. So instead what we do is we say, hey, instead of everybody, let's divide it into a group that makes sense, and it's big enough we can make money on it, but it's small enough we can deal with it. And then once we get in there, we want to learn as much as we can about it. This group, realizing that they're different people, but they may have some things in common, and if they do, we then can try to create either a war room or persona about them, so that when we're building our products or figuring out our brand and our marketing, all of that, it's much easier. That's the value of segmentation.